So I'm still feeling relatively energetic, having preached this morning. So it's the guys at Woody's tonight at 7 p.m. that are going to really lose out. I'm definitely going to run out of steam by that point. So I'm carrying on this series on Lost and Found, and what we're going to look at today is a little bit of teaching Jesus does around our possessions and our stuff. And so if we read that together, I'll read it to you. Then someone called from the crowd, "Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own." Then he told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, 'My friend, you have enough stored away for years. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?' Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." Now, one of the weird things that you may not know is in Luke's Gospel, Jesus talks about money more than prayer or worship. You might even go so far as to say he had a bit of a preoccupation with talking about money and possessions. And I was thinking, well, why is that? Why was Jesus so interested in that topic? And I think it's because it has the potential to distract us unlike anything else. That stuff, money, wealth, has that ability to snare us, has that ability to capture our hearts, our minds, our attention, our time, our energy, in a way few other things can. So I think Jesus was constantly trying to point to people that actually this stuff, if you don't control it, it will control you. So he tells stories, he tells all kinds of stories about this. And this is a really strange one because Jesus, the great teacher, would stand up and have his kind of things he wanted to say. But this is Jesus off the cuff. This is Jesus responding to a heckler. So this is someone in the crowd, possibly who wasn't prepared necessarily to identify himself, just shouts out, "Teacher, tell my brother to share with me." And I think the interesting thing here is that this was fairly common. People would go to the rabbis, to the teachers of the law, to settle their disputes, because these guys were the experts in the law. So it would be a fairly common thing to happen. So this guy has decided to yell to Jesus from the crowd, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And it just reminded me of growing up and how many times I probably said, "Mum, tell my brother to share. Mum, he's not letting me have any. Mum, it's not fair." We've all probably heard that. When I was at university, I would have lunch with my wife, my now wife. She wasn't my wife then, she was my girlfriend then. So I would have lunch with Marion anyway. And we would go down to the canteen, and every time we went for lunch, I would say, "Do you want a drink?" And every time she would say no. And every time I would buy myself a drink. And every time she would drink half of my drink. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Now, you would have thought I would be smart enough to start buying 2 drinks. But she was so sure every time that she didn't want a drink. So I never bought her one. I still, to this day, have this issue when I go out for meals with my wife. She doesn't necessarily, she'll always say, "I don't want a drink." And the problem is, I'm not great at sharing. You only have to ask my kids. If they touch any of my stuff, I can get a little bit agitated. My phone chargers in particular. Because I'm quite careful with my stuff, it's always in the right place. Which means they all know where to find my stuff. If I was as haphazard as them, they'd never be able to find it. So the problem is that when it comes to sharing, it's something many of us struggle with. But here's the thing, the story Jesus is telling about is a particular type of sharing. And there's something about kids and money with their parents that has the possibility to cause absolute mayhem. Now this is a TV show called Succession, which is really, really grim, but has won lots and lots of awards, because basically it's about a family pulling itself apart over the dad's inheritance. So they're all squabbling for position to be the ones that inherit the most. And the problem is, when it comes to inheritance, when it comes to siblings quarrelling over their rights when it comes to money from their parents, that has the potential to blow families up. Because being siblings is hard enough. It can be quite tricky to get on with your brother or your sister. If you then throw money in the mix, it's like adding fuel to the fire. And so I think when it comes to our families, we need to really ask for God's wisdom when it comes to money, because it can do a lot of harm. Because in this story, the harm has been done. The man comes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Now this is what literally Jesus responds. He responds by saying, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" Firstly, Jesus calls him man, which is really insulting in the Hebrew world. It wasn't a nice thing to call someone. So Jesus is clearly irritated by A, being heckled, but B, by the question and what the guy is asking. Because here's the thing. Jesus is saying, you want me to take part in blowing your family up. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm not playing that game. I'm not getting involved in you destroying your relationship with your brother over money. I'm not playing. I'm not having anything to do with it. Because here's the thing, relationships matter most. So these are my three boys at a Welsh International. And for me, I long for them to have really good relationships with each other. And then it means I need to be really careful in how I deal with them when it comes to money. I need wisdom from God on how to do it well. Because as I say, it has the potential to cause lots of problems. But this guy, I think one of the reasons Jesus is annoyed with him is because this guy thinks he's coming to Jesus for justice. And this guy's understanding of justice is what I am owed. Problem is, the biblical view of justice is about what they are owed. What those who have no voice, those who've been neglected, those who've been downtrodden, those who have no one to speak for them, they are the ones we are to seek justice for, not for ourselves. But how many times do we go to Jesus expecting him to take our side? How many times do we think someone's being unreasonable, so we go to Jesus and we say, Lord, I pray you would change their minds, that they would wake up to how stupid they're being, how unreasonable they're being, and actually they would see things the real way, the right way, the true way, my way. Well, I know we like to sing songs about Jesus always being on our side, and yes, he is, against evil, against sin, against oppression. He's always on your side. Is he always on your side in an argument with a fellow member of church? No, he is not. Is he always on your side in an argument with your brothers and sisters? With your parents? With your colleagues? I'm afraid not. So we need sometimes to recognise that Jesus wants good relationships, and sometimes that means us understanding we might be in the wrong. That actually our request for justice on our terms isn't necessarily how God sees the situation. So anyway, we move on. So Jesus then tells a little story. And so he says, a rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, never has a slide been so perfect. What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. Now here's the thing. Firstly, as someone pointed out to me this morning, we have to explain this story in the 21st century because we don't quite get it. Because the idea of having enough so that you can kick back and relax seems like a really good idea. Seems like a great plan. But in the first century, it was a terrible idea. And there's a number of reasons for that. The first clue that this isn't quite right is the phrase, he said to himself. In Luke's gospel, if you ever see he said to himself, that person is on the wrong side of the line. It's a little clue that Luke gives that someone is about to say or do something stupid. That actually they are setting themselves up in opposition to what God would want. And to drive it home, Luke in this parable, there are 6 eyes. This guy, basically, in this parable Jesus tells, is all I. It's all about him. And actually, he doesn't involve the community in anything in his decision-making process. What you have to understand is, if he's the richest landowner in the area, all the people in the village would work for him or be involved with him.
Sounds like he's thinking about himself and nobody else.
Exactly right. And the reality of this is, here he is piling up all this wealth for himself, all this grain. What do you think that does to the grain price in the village? He effectively drives the prices up so he can get even more money. So this guy is so far on the wrong side of the line when it comes to communal life, that actually what he should do with this wealth he's accumulated in the fields around the village is talk to the village about the best way to use it. How can he help those perhaps who haven't got so much? How can he use his wealth, that wonderful crop that he has, to serve people around him?
Invest in it.
Well, we'll see in a sec. So this Isaiah actually picks up on it and points out, what sorrow for you who buy up house after house and field after field until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. There's something here about this man's selfishness that's breaking down community relationships, and he's going to find himself on his own, alone. And it just reminded me of Smaug. For those of you who've seen The Hobbit or read The Hobbit, this is a dragon that stores up all this wealth and doesn't do anything with it. Just sits on it. Doesn't let anyone near it. And so there's this picture in this passage of here's a guy with all this stuff and he's not doing anything useful with it. Or, if you like other films, it reminded me of the seagulls in Finding Nemo. Mine, 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 mine. And the reality is sometimes we can go through life a bit like that, can't we? We could be a little bit mine, mine, mine. What can I accumulate for me? What can I have for me? Possibly at the expense of others. Because the question we often ask is, how much is enough? And the answer is always a little bit more than I have now. They once did a survey of churches about church planting. And they asked these churches, at what point would you be ready to church plant? And they all said, when we've got a little bit more resource than we have now. So they drilled down into that. How much more would you need? And they said 20%. The survey found that from churches with 5,000 members down to churches with 50 members, they all wanted 20% more than they currently had before they were prepared to plant a church. And here's the thing for us. Before we're prepared to take a big step of faith, before we're prepared to be incredibly generous, a lot of the time what we think is, if I had a little bit more, then I would be willing to do this. If I had just a bit more, then I would do that. But the reality is, you'll never have enough if we have that mindset. Because the thing is, if we go through life treating it like a game of Monopoly, accumulating more and more for ourselves, the reality is, it always ends badly. At least certainly in our house. To the point where we can no longer play Monopoly. And Monopoly is now banned in our house, all due to me getting involved between two of my sons over Mayfair. One of them was trying to persuade the other to give it to him for a song. I intervened saying, you're just blackmailing your younger brother, he worships you, he'll let you have it, it's not fair, and before you know it, everything gets flipped. But the thing about Monopoly is, there's something about a Monopoly approach to life that ultimately, once you've got hotels on Mayfair and Park Lane, you just sit back and just watch the money come in. You don't even need to buy anything else. You don't even need to play the game. You just watch everyone else going around the board, hitting Regent Street and starting to pray that they roll high enough to get past Park Lane and Mayfair. But this attitude of just kick back and watch the money roll in is literally what Jesus is saying to this guy. And the thing is, Jesus is doing a little play on Ecclesiastes here. Because in Ecclesiastes it says, the guy says, I know I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And I'll sit back and say to myself, you've enough stored away for years to come, now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Doesn't that sound nice? Sun lounger, cocktail, sunshine, what's not to like? And in Ecclesiastes, Jesus is clearly drawing on Ecclesiastes in this parable, so his listeners would have immediately gone, this is an Ecclesiastes thing. And in Ecclesiastes it says, so I commend the enjoyment of life, because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat, drink, and be glad. All well and good, you might say. The only problem is, that's only half of what the guy in Ecclesiastes says. Because in Ecclesiastes he goes on to say, the joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of the life God has given them. So there's a play on Ecclesiastes here, because Jesus, at the end of the parable, says to the man, You fool, you will die this very night. So there's something here about the fact that life is a gift from God. And it's God that will decide when our time is up. But if we live thinking we can control things, if we live just accumulating more and more and more stuff, if we play Monopoly with life, what we forget is it all goes back in the box. You don't get to take it with you. So Jesus is saying, why on earth would you spend your life accumulating stuff and then in a moment you're gone and that stuff is worthless to you?
Or you will end up in jail.
Possibly, if only.
Yes, I've heard that in the Lord.
So there's that. Then who will get everything you worked for, Jesus says. What's the point in storing up all this stuff? And he goes on to say, because life is not measured by how much you own. Now the way my brain works is, okay, life is not measured by how much you own. Therefore, what is life measured by? And am I winning? And that's the challenge for us sometimes. I think we honestly sometimes slip into this idea of possessions are how I know if I'm winning. It's how I'm keeping score. But the Bible and Jesus in this parable says, life is not measured by how much you own. He says a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So what is life measured by is the wrong question. The right question to ask is, do I have a rich relationship with God? Because when you ask that question, it flips everything around. Because life, having a rich relationship with God is a result of God's grace. God first loved us. God's grace pours his love out on us before we've done anything. We don't deserve it and we can't earn it. So that means the scoring system does not apply. No one is judging if you are winning. No one is judging whether you've got enough stuff. You don't need the scorecard anymore. That actually, when we understand that we are to live with a rich relationship with God and all that we have is a gift from him to us, then we can let go of keeping score and we can live with a freedom and a joy that comes from that rich relationship with God. And so many people are trapped in the scorecard mentality that they're trying to see, are they winning? They're constantly comparing themselves to family members, to friends. Have I got the right car, the right house? Do I go on the right holidays? Have I got the latest iPhone? But the reality is a rich relationship with God sets you free from all of that. And actually you're free to then use your money, your possessions, the thing God has blessed you with, to serve him. That you can take that generous love that he has poured out on you and reflect that generosity back to him with all that you are and all that you have. In being generous to others, being generous to the community, being generous in church, being generous to friends, family, whatever. That we copy that generosity we first receive. So that's the point. When it comes to our money and possessions, is we have a fantastic investment opportunity. That rather than investing in more stuff, we can invest in God's kingdom. We can use the things that he's given us. Rather than hoarding it or guarding it or making more of it, we can be lavish and generous and open-handed. Because the thing is, God calls us to be part of his kingdom, to see his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And that's going to take every one of us, all that we are and all that we have. Our time, our energy, but also our money and our possessions. Jesus goes on after this parable to ask a very simple question. You can tell where your heart is by what you do with your money. So the challenge is, I don't know whether this is something you ever do. Maybe because of COVID it's something you haven't done in a long time. Is just sit down and look at your money. Where's it going? Because if you don't control it, it will control you. Have you thought about how much you're giving? Whether that's to church or to other causes. I know some people have asked, Matt, how do you give to this church? Because one of the things at the Woodlands group of churches is we don't generally have offerings for church. If we have an offering, it's for a mission partner. Because we believe giving is between you and God. So there are some forms at the back you can talk to Matt if you're interested in maybe using some of your resources to bless the work of the church here. But I think the challenge for all of us is, do we even think about it? You know, is it one of those things that we regularly do? Do we do a little MOT of our finances and say, where's it all gone? What am I using it for? And how can I be using it for God's kingdom? Because life is a gift from God. And life has a clear goal, which is a rich relationship with God. So how do I use my money and my possessions as part of that? Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for the gift that you've given us of this life. And Lord, I just pray that everyone here today would understand or be reminded that life is a gift. In fact, all that you give us is a gift. That we are stewards of your blessings. That you pour out your goodness and kindness and grace and love upon us. And therefore our lives become a response to the love you've already shown us. That Lord, your generosity to us in love and in giving your Son would be reflected in our lives as we give our time, our energy, our possessions, our money, whatever it is you call us to do, Lord, that we would serve you. And Lord, I just pray for anyone here today who perhaps is caught up in that scorecard mentality, that actually they're keeping score, whether that's with their possessions or qualifications or whatever it is, Lord. Lord, would you set us free from that kind of thinking? Would you set us free to understand that we can have a rich relationship with you, and that in loving you and being loved by you, there is freedom. Freedom from comparisons, freedom from trying to keep score. That you love us. I just want to pray now, Lord, that everybody in this room would know you couldn't love them any more than you do right now. There is nothing we can do to earn your love. That it is a free gift from you towards us.
Yes.
And all we can say is thank you. We love you too. Amen.
Amen.